We took a break last week from our current series in Wellbeing, and we celebrated Mother's Day. We honored all the fantastic women who are part of our church community. But today, we're diving straight back in, and we're looking at financial well-being. And remember, when we're talking about well-being, what we're referring to is God's shalom peace. That sense of almost unexplainable harmony that he can give and wholeness to every area of our lives. We are made fearfully and wonderfully, the Psalms tell us. And God has made us and created us to be well. But I know that for some of us, that's not always the case. So we want to look at God's plan for our well-being, to get back to being well in every area of our lives. The world has a lot of great and good advice, but what we want is God's best on this hot and relevant topic. And as you can see behind me, what we've been looking at is breaking our lives into certain tanks. We've almost got like a dashboard of life, and each of these tanks, they can range from being empty and depleted, or they can be completely full and overflowing. And as you can see on this side, this is you. These are the different areas we've been talking about: physical, emotional, spiritual, relational. Next week, we'll talk about vocational. And today, we're talking about financial. And even though we're focusing in on each one of these separately, it's very important that as we apply any of God's plan for our well-being, that we bear in mind this is all a part of the whole. They all interrelate and affect each other. So if one is particularly low and empty, it can drain the others. Similarly, if we raise one up and fill one, it can bring the others. For example, if our spiritual tank is especially high, what that can do is bring about a real positive emotional response. It can encourage us to maybe relate with others more, to share that sense of fullness that we have. And again, if one of these is particularly low, maybe our physical pot is low, our physical tank is low, it can cause us to lose motivation to meet with people, lose motivation maybe to seek God or to find our purpose in our vocation. We want to recognize that this is a huge topic, and it can't just be confined to a teaching series on a Sunday morning. This material that we've got, we want you to be blessed with. We want you to apply it to your lives. In fact, what we're doing with this particular series is breaking down and separating the messages and putting them together in a playlist. You can find them on YouTube. They'll be on the podcast, of course, and they'll be on our website shortly as well. So you can watch and apply these messages in the weeks and months to come. But what we want to create is not just a series of well-being, but a season of well-being. We as a church, we want to come out of lockdown stronger and people that are closer to God. And so we have this series, but also after Easter, in the next few weeks, we're going to be launching small groups again. And we are wanting and hoping that all of our small groups will be well-being small groups for a full term. We're providing some great material for the small group leaders, some stuff that will really bless you and help us to take us further in this journey of well-being. And on top of that, we also have Dave Smith's Wellbeing book available. But what it is a devotional, a 50-day devotional that you can do personally. So we are corporately looking at well-being in our teaching series. We are intimately looking at well-being in our small groups, and we are personally looking at well-being in this devotional guide. If you want to get one of these and you're in the room today, they'll be available after the service. If you're watching us online, you can order these through emails at hello@crossgate.church, and we can organize delivery or pickup for that. We suggest a donation of £5, but if, as we talk about financial well-being today, finances are a struggle for you and you know that you will take this material and use it, we want to bless you with this book. So please grab yourself one of these to continue that well-being journey in this season. And we've been loosely following the story of Elijah in 1 Kings. And there's 3 people that I want to refer to just really briefly at the start here with regards to financial well-being from the story of Elijah. And the first one is Elijah himself. He was an itinerant prophet, an itinerant speaker. He was living in a time of drought, a time of lack, but he's fully relying on God for his needs. One of God's names is Jehovah Jireh, that God is our provider. And in name and in nature, God is Elijah's provider. We've heard the stories of how things were provided for him by angels, by ravens. And I want to ask you, do you rely on God for your needs? Or are you so self-sufficient? Are you so planned up? Are you so self-reliant that there's actually no room for God in your life? Do you rely on God for your needs? Second person is a widow that Elijah is he's asked by God to go and meet at a place called Zarephath. In 1 Kings 17, we find this story. And this widow she's about to make her last meal, effectively, for her and her family. And she's in need of a miracle. She's come to the end of everything that she has, and she believes that this will be the last meal that her and her family eat before they die. And she's instructed to give a portion of that last bit of her resources that she has left to Elijah. And now, in this story, Elijah represents God. He's a prophet. He's God's mouthpiece. He's delivering God's message. And what God promises is that if she can give this portion to Elijah, to him, effectively, then she will have everything that she needs. Her needs will be met. And so in obedience, even though she has barely anything to give, she gives that portion to God. A couple of years ago, me and Steph were in quite a rough place financially, or at least we should have been had it not been for God. Steph was out of work for almost a year. And we'd adjusted our finances and we'd adjusted our budget in one sense to accommodate for that. But there was a real sense that we missed the wage that she would have brought in. Part of her wage covered our mortgage and our food bills. But throughout that time, we were challenged not to stop giving. The obvious thing would be to stop giving away a portion so that you could continue to live in the way that you always have done. But we were challenged not to stop giving. I tell you that God blessed us so much through that time. Every time we came to the end of the month, we actually had more than we calculated that we would have. Because we were continuing to give, even when we felt like we didn't have much, God really provided for our needs and more. Do you need a miracle in your finances today? I would challenge you to look, no matter what level of or amount of finance you have, I would challenge you to look and see where you can give as an act of trust to God and to further rely on Him to provide. Finally, this third person is Elisha. So we've had Elijah, we've had the widow at Zarephath, and now we have Elisha. And he was a trainee prophet. He carries on the ministry after Elijah goes up to heaven. And we meet him in 1 Kings 19, and he's working on a farm. And he has, it's not, a meager small plot. He has a massive setup. And so it's probably logical to deduce that Elisha comes from a place of wealth. He has a lot going for him. He's got a comfortable life. Yes, he works hard, but he comes from a place of plenty. And what we see is that he actually gives away everything to follow Elijah, but to follow God's call on his life. In obedience, he gives away everything. He burns his equipment, and he does that not as a silly act, but he does that to cook the meat of the animals that he has. And then he gives that meat away to his community. He blesses his community to follow God. Now, this isn't everyone's calling. Not all of us are called to give away everything. But the challenge is, would you be willing to if God asks you? Maybe it might not be everything, but if you're asked to increase your giving, if you're asked to give away more than you feel comfortable doing, could you do it as a response to fully relying on God? It's clear from the scriptures that we're called to be generous people. We're called to be defined by our generosity. Everything that we have, we can give. Matthew 10 verse 8 says, Jesus talks about how God has freely given to us. And in response, we should freely give of everything. And even though we might not like to talk about our finances much in our culture, over 2,500 scriptures are dedicated to money and possession. It's clear that this matters to God. God has a lot to say about finances because he knows how important it is to our health, to our well-being. Having finances, having our houses in order is a godly thing. Because when it's out of order, What is it? It's in chaos. And what God loves to do is bring order from chaos out of love. That's what he did right at the beginning of creation. That's what he continues to do in our lives. Out of his love, he wants to bring order out of chaos. And I'm not sure what the personal state of your finances is today. UK statistics tell us that over 70% of people are experiencing stress directly related to their finances. And in fact, this is a pre-COVID figure. This is a pre-COVID statistic. I imagine that figure will be much higher now as a result of what we've been through recently. And what does stress do? Stress, it affects our emotions. It affects our emotional health. And when that's affected, it can have a knock-on effect with how we relate to people. It affects our relational health. We know that stress can affect our physical health and well-being. It causes fatigue, weight gain, weight loss, lots of things. What it can do, stress can drive a wedge between us and God as we start to trust him less and less and affect our spiritual well-being. And of course, finances are related to our vocational well-being, our sense of purpose and our job and role as well. And we can see how maybe in this one tank, as that starts to deplete our financial health and well-being, it has an effect on all the others. But what this has going for it in one sense is that if we can improve and fill that tank, the potential is that all these others can rise with it. And so as we look at improving our financial well-being, filling that tank, I want to tell you that a full tank does not necessarily mean a full wallet. It doesn't necessarily mean a full bank account. Being empty is not a place of poverty, and being full is not a place of being rich. We're not talking about increasing and advising you how to increase your wealth. This is not one of those programs or promises. What we want to see is this tank full to the brim with God's shalom peace. Whatever the amount that you bring in and have outgoing, whatever the amount and the things that you are blessed with. And let's be honest, it's no good having more if all it does is causes you more stress. And similarly, it's no good in giving it all away if that causes you more stress. Again, what we want is God's best. We want God's plan for our well-being. And it's clear, again, that God's best strongly revolves around us being givers, being generous people, regardless of that level of finance that we have. Elijah, the widow at Zarephath, Elisha, they can all be defined as people that gave of what God had blessed them with. Whether they were struggling and almost at their wits' end, almost at the end of their life, or whether they were in a place of overflow and full of resources. The commonality between the three of them is that they were fully reliant on God in their giving and in their generosity. In all other areas of our lives, we seem to be able to rely on God. But for some reason, when we talk about our finances, the financial side of our life, we tend to hold on to this with a bit more of a tighter grip. It's very difficult for us to loosen our grip in this area. Something I've found helpful and that we found helpful recently is to have a shift in our language. I want to suggest that we should stop using language that limits us and start using language that releases and inspires us. And one word that I want to suggest and recommend that you start using in your personal finances is the word economy. Our English word economy is made up of two Greek words. I'm not going to try and pronounce them, but the first one means home or house, and the second one means management. So we might think of countries and governments and businesses, but at its core, an economy is the careful management of our personal finances. It's what I said before about keeping your house in order, bringing order out of what might, at this moment in time, be chaos. God wants us to have financial well-being. And to do that, He's given us our own personal economy to manage. And if you have a family, it's a family economy. If you are living on your own, then it is your own personal economy. And that's been given to support you and also to enable you to live well, to have well-being. But like any economy, like our national or global economy, It affects others around us depending on how well we manage it. And while we're talking about language, let's recognize that although you have an economy to manage, that economy is really a gift from God. And that skill of management is really a call to steward that gift. We are blessed with skills and with talent and the ability and opportunity to work or to gain money from the different support schemes that are set up in our country, depending on your circumstances. And so we are all indebted to God, because God is the outright owner and creator of this world. Colossians 1 tells us that through Jesus all things were created. Everything was made in him, and also everything was made for him. Everything is God's. And so even though we may work very hard for a wage, that wage has still been entrusted to us by its original owner. It's on loan for us to run our personal, our family economy in a way that would honor him. It's not my money. It's not our money. It's an economy that we've been entrusted to run by God. So that's a language shift to look at, but let's look at a couple of perspective shifts as well. Let's take a quick look at a biblical perspective of finance, of your economy, with that view to release more of God's shalom peace in our well-being. First perspective is that money is not in and of itself evil. Money is not evil. Money is currency. And of course, it can constrict and it can confine us, but it's also an enabler. It allows us to buy and to sell essential things for us to live and have a certain quality of life. Back in Genesis 2, God created gold, what our money is the promise of course, our currency is the promise of. And back then, it's part of God's good creation. And before we formalized currency, obviously, we would trade with labor and with items. Money in itself is not evil. It is a tool. And of course, it's a tool that can be used for evil, but also it can be used to do so much good. Dave Ramsey, a financial expert, he says that money amplifies the good, but it also exposes what is bad. And Ben mentioned it before in the kids video. It's so important that we grasp this, that money is not evil, but loving money is. It's very clear, 1 Timothy 6 verse 10, that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil things. And not only can this inflict evil on other people in how we manage and run it and steward it, but also it goes on to say that it leads people to pierce themselves. A love of money harms us. It destroys our well-being as well as the well-being of others around us. And this leads us to the second perspective. So money is not evil. Secondly, church, you are in control. You are in control. Your money does not control you. It is a tool that you control. God has empowered us. God has blessed us with our own economy that he personally finances, and he gives us power and control to steward. The money does not have the power. You do. Again, Dave Ramsey, he says that God isn't against you having money. What he's against is money having you. God is not against you having money, but he is against money having hold of you. That's why he gives you control. God trusts you. We talk so much about how much we trust God, which is right, but God trusts you. He trusts you to run your own economy in the best way possible, but he also gives us help. He also supports us. And we'll come to that and a couple of key points in a minute. So we've got a language shift. We're talking about our own personal economy. We've got a couple of perspective shifts in that money is not evil and that God gives us the authority to control our finances. Now let me show you these two key points that will hopefully help to bring more shalom, more of the peace of God, to fill our tanks and to increase our financial and overall well-being. First is really practical, but it is also really, really important. We need a budget. We need a plan for our finances. God has a plan for the world. We need a plan for our finances. John Kirkby, the founder of Christians Against Poverty, CAP, He's helped countless people out of debt and poor money situations. He even helped himself. That's where it all started. He's a living testimony of what God can do in bringing people out of debt. But he says the number one God-centered piece of advice to increase your financial well-being is to create and live within a budget. In light of our perspective shifts that we talked about a minute ago, leadership expert John Maxwell, he says that a budget is telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went. Again, you have been empowered. You have the power to tell your money where it should go. Jesus himself, in Luke 14, he says that no one should build or launch forward with an idea before first counting the costs, before first making a plan, and specifically a financial plan. And he's talking about spiritual things here as a metaphor, but that includes whether we should build a tower, whether we should go to war, and whether we should take up our cross daily. And the Bible also clues us in as to what should make up this plan, this budget. So really quickly here, we should budget to give. Remember, we want to be generous people. We should budget to save. And we should also budget to enjoy. Our budget should comprise of those three sections: to give, to save, and to enjoy. Deuteronomy 14 teaches us that a tithe is 10%, and it should be set aside for God, but we're not limited to that. Grace teaches us that we should be willing to give more, and potentially even all that we have. Remember the life of Elisha and what he gave up. Remember the destitute widow and what she gave up. We should budget to save, not to hoard and to let God's blessings go to waste, but to wisely set aside. Ecclesiastes 11 encourages us to split our pot into portions and to distribute them wisely in preparation for any eventuality. Remember the story in Genesis when Joseph, in his wisdom, advises Pharaoh to set aside a portion in the years of plenty in anticipation of the years of lack that may be to come. And in 1 Corinthians 16, Paul instructs the church to set aside an amount every week, really practical, to prepare for future costs. In stewarding our economy, we're called to give. We're called to save. And then we're actually also entitled and called to enjoy the money. We've been blessed with it. Enjoy that blessing. Don't spend it all on ourselves. Don't spend it all on your own needs, but have a portion that you enjoy. Proverbs 21:20 says that it's only a fool that spends and devours everything that he has. But we're called to give. We're called to save. And we are called to and encouraged to enjoy the blessings and the created world that God has given to us. And in doing that, it can be a witness to how good God is in our lives to others. So practically, create and live within a budget. Release God's best in that structure and framework. Increase your financial well-being. But secondly, this second key is to maintain a surrendered heart throughout it all. Maintain a surrendered heart. And this is so important and should always be our starting point. As believers, those who know Jesus, we have surrendered our hearts. We have surrendered our lives to him already. But if we're honest, we do hold on to this part of our life. We do hold on to the ownership of this tank much more and much tighter than any of the others that we're exploring. And for those that don't know Jesus yet, of course, your finances are well and truly in your own grip, and you may be feeling the full weight and responsibility of that. But I want to encourage you, whether you believe in Jesus today or not at this moment in time, is to loosen that grip a little, to hold it a little more lightly, and to hold it surrendered to God. Let me show you an analogy to tell you a little bit more. I love coming down here. There's a real sense that it is good for my well-being to be outside, to connect with the earth again. It takes me back and makes me think of the account of Adam in Genesis, that how mankind and people were placed in a garden. And it may not look like much at the moment, but come summertime, this place will be full of fruit and vegetable and flowers. This is my allotment garden. Welcome. let me show you something. This is what I've brought you down here to see. These are my apple trees, and they're a special variety. They're called a cordon apple, which means they're a little bit smaller, but they still have the potential to really outgrow this area. And you can train them against fences, against walls, but I've got them strung up between these posts on these wires. And the idea is that these wires take the weight of the apple tree, so that it doesn't have to invest energy into its roots, and it can concentrate on producing the best fruit possible. With these apples, they will always need a support system. They will always need a framework, a plan, an area to give them support, for them to be healthy, for them to even survive. And this framework that may look like it restricts these trees is actually here to enable it to produce as much fruit and be as healthy as possible. And as we look at ourselves and at our financial well-being, we may well be able to get by on our own. We may be able to produce enough fruit to sustain us in normal times, but we're definitely not living in normal times. And there are winds, there are rain, there is drought, there are storms in life that can and will come our way. And without a permanent support system, a structure, a plan, we really don't stand a chance. A budget, a plan, a structure around our financial lives really enables well-being. We may have the misconception that it is restrictive or confining, but just like in the case of these apples, these wires, this structure takes the weight of the trees. Our structure that we put in place, the plan, can take the weight for us so that we can be free to put our energy into the things that matter most, to release that well-being and to do the best with what God has given us. With all this being said, in this analogy and in real life here, I will do all I can to make sure that these apple trees thrive and succeed. I've set up this structure, I'll be pruning them, I'll be watering and feeding them, but the winter will come, and the winter can be cold, and the summer can be very, very hot. There can be too much and too little rain. There will be winds that come and shake this structure and maybe even spoil the blossom, which will later become fruit. I will do all I can, and we should do all we can in the areas of our finances and our financial well-being. But at the end of the day, here on the allotment, I'm at the mercy of the elements. I'm at the mercy of a power greater than me. And in our lives, we need to recognize that we are at the mercy of a power greater than us. It's down to God whether really these apple trees succeed. It's down to God whether really we gain and achieve financial well-being, and whether the plan that we put in place works or not. What's important to remember is that yes, we're at the mercy of God, but we're also in the grace of God. We're here to manage and to steward, not to hoard and to keep. And no plan has all the answers. No structure can protect against every eventuality. And so actually the best thing that we can actually do, the best way to release well-being into our lives, to have God's shalom peace over our finances, is to entrust them to Him. To surrender the plan, but also to plan with surrendered hearts.
And so in application today, church, for some of us it'll be really, really practical and really simple. We need to go home and just start making a budget. We need to take and count the cost of what's coming in, what's going out, and lay it before God and say, how can I do my best in this area? How can I take the weight and the stress off myself and give control to you? But for all of us, there's a sense that we need to surrender this area back over to God again. Whether you are in God's presence, whether you are in His family, whether you call yourself a believer or not today, we all take parts of our lives back again. And there's always a sense that every single day we need to surrender to Him. And especially in this area, and you know, not being dismissive of how difficult this last year has been, not being dismissive of how difficult things may be moving forward into this new season as things return back to whatever normal is. But even more so in light of that, we need God. We need to surrender to Him. for that structure, but that sense of surrender, that he is above it all. We need him, church. And we're going to take a song to close, and this is a time for you to maybe enact some surrender. It might be in your heart, might be physically, you want to stand, you want to do something within worship. I want to encourage you in the room. We'll have people that want to pray for you afterwards if you want some prayer, if you want to take some steps in surrender. If you're watching us online, we've got Zoom prayers afterwards, and we'd love you to join us on them for people to take you through that process. Again, if you want that practical step, we're running courses in the next couple of weeks. We're relaunching our money management course. Please jump on our website to find out about that under the small groups tab. Well, let's take a moment to surrender again, to loosen our grip maybe on this area of our lives that's causing us stress, that's causing us worry, that's causing us hurt. And in the uncertainty of the world, let's put our certainty in God.
We hope you enjoyed the message. If you would like to take the next steps in your well-being journey, we will be running dedicated well-being small groups each term. Check out crossgate.church for the latest information or sign up at crossgate.life. If you would like further support, we'd love to hear from you. Just email wellbeing@crossgate.church. Thank you for watching, and we pray that the well-being that flows from Christ will continue to become yours in this season.